Well, as you mentioned, Yvonne, there's a big security focus in this package. What we see is the government doing everything possible to say to Pacific Island nations, if you need to turn to any country for security, then please turn to Australia. And there seems to be the investment to match it. Now, of the $1.9 billion that the government's committing over some 5 years to the Pacific, about $1.4 billion of that over the next period of time is going to be basically devoted to measures that are going to boost security or increase security cooperation between Australia and the Pacific. Now, there's not a lot of detail in the budget papers, but this money is going to go to things like the Lombrum Naval Base redevelopment or similar redevelopments like that, where Australia is going to look to partner with Pacific Island countries to try and upgrade that critical infrastructure. Wharves might also be upgraded as part of this. There's also going to be expanded training between Pacific Island nations and Australian Defence Forces. I think it's very likely that as a result of that, we will see a bigger ADF footprint in the region, with the Defence Force sending more of our people out more regularly to Pacific Island nations. And on top of that, I think you're going to see more investment from Australia to help countries like PNG and Fiji, for example, develop their armed forces a little bit more, including work with PNG on its fledgling Air Force. So they're the sort of things that the government's talking about here. It is worth noting here, Yvonne, just quickly, that not all of this money is new money. In the case of the $1.4 billion that we're talking about in the Pacific for security, about $920 million of that will come from defence, and defence isn't getting new funding for that. It has to find other savings from other parts of its vast portfolio to try and fund that. But it is a very clear focus here, the Pacific. The government signalling again with this budget that it's perhaps the top diplomatic priority for the Australian government.
And Stephen, what about foreign aid? Is the government going to boost development spending?
Well, it is, but only very modestly. What you're essentially seeing over the next few years are very slight increases to the development budget. It's now around $4.75 billion a year that we're looking at, and trending up slightly. The problem is when you look at other factors like inflation, which we're talking about quite a bit tonight, as well as just the broader growth of the Australian budget, if you look at it as a percentage of gross national income or of Australia's prosperity more broadly, it's actually falling away. It's now at 0.19% for next year, and that puts us near the bottom of the list when it comes to developed nations. Now, there is one thing that the government is doing in the out years, beyond the out years, from 26, 27 onwards, the government is effectively putting a form of indexation in place. So what that means is it's saying every year from that 26, 27 financial year, we're going to index growth at 2.5%. So it's going to build in these increases over time. That's been welcomed by the aid sector. They say that's really necessary, but they say in the meantime, Australia is still woefully inadequate in terms of the money that it's giving, pointing out that we're not nearly as generous as other wealthy countries across the world. And I think that's criticism we're going to hear quite a bit from the sector over the coming few days and weeks.
And lastly, it sounds like the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade will get some money as well. What are the details here?
Yeah, perhaps not breaking news for many people. It's a fairly obscure nook of the budget, but I think important given there has been a lot of unhappiness in DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, over years now, a sense that it hasn't got the funding or the priority that it deserves, and as a review that was handed down internally not long ago found also a sense that it's often been pushed aside by government and policymakers over the last decade in particular when it comes to crucial national security and foreign policy decisions. So there is more money for the budget for DFAT in this budget. Not a huge amount, around $500 million in total. A lot of that goes towards basically putting money towards problems which frankly speaking should have been solved a long time ago. In particular, money for leases, for diplomatic compounds, where there was a funding shortfall, money for IT systems and secure communication systems that simply aren't up to scratch and that are getting old and creaky and need to be improved. But there is also a little bit of money to do a few interesting and new things, including $80 million over 4 years to improve strategic messaging and strategic communications by the department. That's one problem that's been identified in this internal review, that the department simply isn't communicating effectively and consistently friendly enough with people in the outside world. So more money for DFAT, not a huge amount. Much of it's fairly pedestrian, but I suspect it will still be welcomed in RG Casey after quite a few years of neglect.
Stephen Jejets in Canberra on the budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Yvonne. Appreciate it.